So what is the endocrine system? The endocrine system is fundamentally a system of control. The body has two main control systems, the nervous system and the endocrine system. The nervous system is responsible for sort of short-term immediate control, mostly the control of muscles, whether those are muscles that cause skeletal action or muscles that control the flow of blood and digestive fluids and things like that through the body, through smooth muscle. But generally speaking, the nervous system acts on a scale of like microseconds to milliseconds, whereas the endocrine system is your body's chemical control system, and it acts on a time period of seconds to months. And so it affects every cell in your body and can often affect them in very long-term ways. The endocrine system and the nervous system, so it turns out, and we'll get into this more, that the endocrine system is actually directly controlled by the nervous system. The main controlling thing in the endocrine system is the pituitary gland. The pituitary gland is directly controlled by the hypothalamus, which is part of the brain. Since these two control systems are linked in both their function and their structure, one controls the other, they're sometimes considered together as the neuroendocrine system. The endocrine system is the set of organs that produce endocrine hormones. Those are hormones that are secreted into the blood and thus capable of having systemic effect. All endocrine organs are glands, but not all glands are endocrine organs. Glands that secrete into the blood are endocrine organs. And an important thing to keep in mind is that while there are some dedicated glands that basically their only job is to be a part of the endocrine system, a lot of things that produce hormones and which are thus endocrine glands are part of other organs. The liver secretes hormones, the heart secretes hormones, the kidney secretes hormones. None of those are primarily endocrine organs, but all of them have some endocrine functionality. The functions of the endocrine system. Let's take them in order. The first function of the endocrine system is detection. Mostly detection of the body's internal environment. Detection of your body's external environment, like hot, cold, pain, stuff like that, mostly done through nervous system receptors. But when things happen in your body, sometimes expected things, sometimes unexpected things, those are often accompanied by the release of a chemical or hormone. That chemical will be detected and then will result in a cascade of other hormones being released that tell your body what's going on. Secondly, and probably most importantly, control. Endocrine hormones control everything from things that are happening very, very quickly, like the activation of the sympathetic nervous system by adrenaline released from the adrenal medulla, to extremely long-term things, like the control of puberty by sex hormones, which can last, years and have effects for the rest of your life. Endocrine hormones usually don't control things super short term. They tend to have longer effects. Specifically, they control growth and repair, development, change in cells, how cells develop and become other new cells, metabolism, how and what types of energy your body is using, and lots of other aspects of cells. One thing which is true about endocrine hormones, which is less true about the nervous system, is that endocrine hormones can frequently change what genes a cell is expressing. And when you change the actual genes that a cell is expressing, you can have a very long-lasting and central impact on that cell's fate. Control goes hand in hand with coordination. Your organs and various tissues often secrete hormones all the time, just to sort of let everyone else know what their state is. So you will have some hormones that will only be produced when an organ or tissue is in distress. A good example of this that we probably won't get into much yet is histamine, which is secreted by tissues when they undergo damage or infection, and basically lets your body know, help, 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 I'm under attack, I'm hurting, I'm bad, I'm inflamed. And other things, like your kidneys will produce hormones that basically just tell your body how much pressure they're under, how much literal pressure they're under. So these are how your cells talk to each other, is they produce hormones. Fundamentally, all of this comes down: detection, control, coordination, to maintaining homeostasis. Pretty much almost, not all, but most homeostatic systems in the body will require the secretion and detection of at least some hormones, because, like I said, this is how cells communicate. So if anything changes, there's going to be a hormone that's produced, or sometimes a nerve that's stimulated, to tell the body about that change so that your body can respond. Hormones are usually controlled through feedback systems. Feedback systems come in two forms: positive and negative feedback. Negative feedback is where you have a stimulus, the stimulus results in a response, usually the production of a hormone. That response has an effect that will lower the original stimulus and thus turn off the response. The classic example of this is the air conditioning loop. You've got, cold temperatures, down temp. This is going to be detected by your thermostat, which will turn on your heater, which will then raise temperatures, which will then suppress. It will be detected by your thermostat, and your thermostat will then turn off the heater, because now things are warm. Negative feedback loops maintain and promote homeostasis. They maintain and preserve, They maintain and preserve homeostasis. They maintain and preserve a constant internal environment. Positive feedback is the exact opposite. It's when something happens And that causes a response, and that response causes more of the stimulus, which causes more response, and more stimulus, and more response, and more stimulus, and more response, and more stimulus, and it just keeps getting, like, farther and farther and farther out of control. Most systems in your body are not controlled by positive feedback, but there are some specific ones that are. Childbirth is controlled by positive feedback. The cascade that happens in your nerves and muscles that results in an action potential is positive feedback. Positive feedback disturbs homeostasis, and if it's allowed to continue unabated, can eventually result in large amounts of damage. Usually what happens is that you have you have something happens, and that causes more of that thing to happen, which then causes more of that thing to happen, which then causes more and 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 more of that thing to happen, until you have an outside factor. Like, this gets so big that it triggers a response that says, stop. And then the system goes back to normal. There are several different ways that hormones can be regulated, patterns of hormone regulation. Some hormones are produced at relatively constant levels throughout the course of the day and throughout the course of your life. Thyroid hormone is a good example of this. You always have to have thyroid hormone because you have a metabolism. And if you don't have thyroid hormone, then you don't have a metabolism, and you are probably dead. So, well, or at least getting towards that direction. So you always need thyroid hormone, and generally speaking, you always need it at about the same levels. Now, sometimes it's going to go up a little bit, and sometimes it's going to go down a little bit. During adolescence, you're going to see a little bit of a spike. Let's say it's the new year and you've decided you're going to get fit, and so you've been doing a lot of exercise. Well, you changed your activity levels. Your body's going to respond by upping the amount of thyroid hormone that it produces. And then it gets around, like, March, and you've kind of fallen off that wagon. And it's going to respond by lowering the amount of thyroid hormone. But it'll generally stay always there and always within a certain band. That's called chronic hormone regulation. It's always there. Maybe it goes up a little bit, maybe it goes down a little bit, but it always is there, and it always is relatively sort of ish the same levels. Acute hormone regulation is when the hormone usually isn't there and is released only in response to a specific event. And the amount of it that's released depends upon the significance of the event and the length, the duration that it's made for depends on how long the event happens. So a good example of this is stress hormones, both epinephrine or adrenaline and glucocorticoids or cortisol. If you're not under stress, you don't secrete it. And then, boom, bear jumps out at you. Brrr! Your body produces tons of adrenaline. I gotta run away. Right? And then you run away, and it could be like hours or days before the next event that's going to trigger that much epinephrine or adrenaline to be released. Maybe now you've got an anatomy test. And it's not quite as dire as, like, sudden bear mangling, but it's definitely going to cause your stress levels to rise. And it might last longer than a bear attack usually does. So maybe you don't get quite as much stress hormone, but it lasts a little bit longer. But it's unpredictable when the hormone will be made because it's made in response to an environmentally triggered event. That's acute regulation. Episodic or cyclic regulation is when hormone is sometimes not present and sometimes present at relatively high levels, but that is determined by internally regulated predictable events. Like the classic one here is going to be female reproductive hormones. You've got estrogen and progesterone that are going to follow very predictable cycles of rising, and then ovulation, and then falling, and then menstruation, and then rising again. But at a fairly predictable way. And so that is episodic or cyclic regulation. The endocrine system can be controlled in several ways. One is controlled by a non-hormonal event. Usually a chemical event, not always, but usually a chemical event. But something which is detected. So, for instance, glucose levels rise in your blood because you just had some ice cream. Your pancreas senses this and secretes insulin. The insulin then causes your cells to absorb the glucose. The glucose levels go down and you stop producing the insulin. Also, for instance, there are some glands, particularly in the pituitary system and parts of the adrenal system, that are under direct neural control. So this is a non-hormonal event, but it is a neurological event. So, for instance, activation of the sympathetic nervous system stimulates the adrenal medulla to produce adrenaline. Stimulation of the hypothalamus can cause the release of many different hormones from the pituitary gland. That's very, very important, but not very common. It's usually only the most important or most controlling upper-level hormones that are under direct neural control. You then have hormonal control, where you have hormones that are being regulated by other hormones. This is probably the most common way that hormones are regulated. So, for instance, thyroid stimulating hormone, or TSH, is produced by the pituitary, and it, surprise, surprise, stimulates the thyroid to produce thyroid hormone. So the release of thyroid hormone is controlled by the amount of thyroid stimulating hormone that's out there. What controls the amount of thyroid stimulating hormone? Well, that's controlled by the amount of thyrotropin releasing hormone that's produced by the hypothalamus. What controls the amount of thyrotropin releasing hormone? Well, several things, but one of them is the amount of thyroid hormone that's out there. It's under a negative feedback control. This is very common for chronically regulated hormones. This is more common for acute regulated hormones.